Okay, so Descartes' epistemology finds its Archimedean points in perhaps the following principle that whatever he is able to clearly and distinctly perceive is true. Now, a lot of you took issue with this, somewhat rightly, because Descartes never gives an explicit definition of what he means when he says something is clear and distinct. And you all can find yourselves in good company because Leibniz raises the exact same complaint against Descartes. And he says that people of our day have abused the principle that they have laid down that whatever I clearly and distinctly perceive about a thing is true or assertable of the thing in question. And he thinks that if this axiom is going to be of any use to us as philosophers or as seekers of knowledge, then we're going to need some kind of criteria for clarity and distinctness. And that's exactly what he gives in the meditation on knowledge, truth, and ideas. So for the first part of this lecture, I'm going to cover this typology of ideas that Leibniz sets out of obscurity, clarity, distinctness, confusion. And then the last part, I'm going to make some comments about what Leibniz thinks ideas are. For a big picture idea, I guess we could say, about Leibniz's typology here, you can think of this as increasing degrees of ability to discriminate amongst ideas or notions. At the lowest level of obscurity, you're unable to discriminate an idea or a notion from anything else or from similar things. And at the highest level, intuitiveness, that consists of immediately being able to discriminate all of the notions involved in an idea. But let's take this step by step. Let's begin by looking at Leibniz's definitions of obscurity and clarity. Something is obscure for Leibniz when it's not sufficient for recognizing the thing represented. If you're not able to pick out the same thing over and over, you're not able to make that discrimination, then it's going to be obscure. But if you are able to pick out that thing from other things, it's going to be clear. So an example of this might be my notion of a llama or an alpaca. I think the one on the left is an alpaca. I think the one on the right is a llama. It's been a couple hours since I made these slides. But I can't tell them apart, really. I couldn't reliably pick out alpacas from llamas if you were to set them out in front of me. My idea of them is obscure. In contrast, I'm really good at noticing and identifying dogs, something I'm really good at. You put something in front of me, I can tell you if it's a dog. I'll never say something's a dog when it's not a dog, and I'll never say something's not a dog when it is a dog. My idea is clear. I'm very, very good at this. I'm rather proud at how good I am at identifying things that are dogs. But while I have a clear notion of a dog, my notion of a dog is confused. An idea is confused when you can't give the sufficient marks for differentiating a thing from anything else. Or Leibniz calls this a nominal definition. So on the left, we have a dog. On the right is a hyena. I would never look at the hyena and say, that's a dog. But I can't tell you why it's not a dog. I don't have a nominal definition of a dog that picks out dogs and excludes hyenas and other things. I don't know why a hyena isn't a dog. And I'm not going to look it up because if I look it up, I'm not going to be able to use this example anymore. However, a zoologist or veterinarian would be able to tell you, and presumably me as well, why a hyena isn't a dog. And that's because she, the zoologist or veterinarian, has a distinct idea of a dog. She has a notion that is connected with marks and tests sufficient to distinguish a dog from all other similar bodies. This is a nominal definition. It's the enumeration of sufficient marks to pick a thing out. Now, when you have a distinct idea, that distinct idea can either be adequate or inadequate. An inadequate idea or notion is one where your nominal definition is not made up of distinct ideas itself. So Leibniz gives the example of the assayer. Now, the assayer has a distinct idea of gold. And this distinct idea includes the nominal definition based off the heaviness of the metal, the color, its solubility in aquafortis, and other things. But while he has a distinct idea, it's inadequate because it includes color. And colors, if we go back to confused ideas, are necessarily confused. So it has to be an inadequate idea. Now, why are our ideas of colors confused ideas? My notion of blue is clear. I can recognize blue when it's presented to me. And you might think it's distinct, as I could suggest this for a candidate nominal definition or sufficient mark for differentiating blue from everything else. And that sufficient mark might be the phenomenal experience of blue. This seems to work as a nominal definition, as nothing that is not blue will be accompanied by phenomenal blueness, and all blue things will be accompanied by a phenomenal experience of blueness, assuming your eyes are normal functioning and assuming normal light, or these kind of ceteris paribus clauses. But Leibniz still puts colors and other sensible qualities received through a singular sense in the category of confused notions. Why is this? And I think a clue from this can be found in a letter that Leibniz wrote to Queen Sophie Charlotte of Prussia. Now, this letter was not in your reading packet, but I'm including this quote here because I think it's illuminating. And he says that, he uses the same example. He says, assayers have marks by which they distinguish gold from any other metal. And even if a person had never seen gold, he can be taught these infallible marks for recognizing it, should he ever encounter it one day. But it's not the same with these sensible qualities. For example, one cannot give marks for recognizing blue if one has not seen it. Hence, blue is its own mark. And in order for someone to know what blue is, we must necessarily show it to them. So if I became an apprentice assayer and assumed that I had never encountered or seen or held gold in my entire life, the assayer could still teach me to identify it. He can give me his nominal definition of gold, his inadequate idea of it. And if I encountered something and I ran these tests and checked it against my nominal idea or my nominal definition, then I can identify it as gold. But we could never give someone a set of tests to determine if something was blue. So think of Mary from the thought experiment in Philosophy of Mind, who spends her entire life in a black and white room. She's never seen any colors. I can't give Mary a nominal idea of blueness or a nominal definition of blueness, like causing phenomenal experience of blue, that she'd be able to use to identify blue, because she would not be able to differentiate or recognize that this idea matches blue from yellow or red, for example. So in order to know what blue is, you have to be shown blue. But it's not the same for picking out gold. You can learn to pick out gold without ever having an experience of gold. Now, in contrast, if your nominal definition includes only distinct notions and the analysis is carried to completion, you've analyzed it down to primitive notions that are simple and can't be analyzed any further. Leibniz doesn't give an example of these notions, but he identifies them with the attribute or absolute attributes of God. Then you're going to have an adequate idea. Now, Leibniz isn't sure if we can have adequate notions, but he thinks the closest thing we have to it is going to be our knowledge of mathematics. But even though our notions of mathematics are the closest we have to adequacy, they're not going to get to the next step up, as it were, in perfect knowledge, and that is an intuitive idea. So a notion or an idea is symbolic, where in place of the thing itself, you make use of a sign or some kind of symbol, or a word, to consider it without actually grasping the nature of the thing or the notions involved in it. Whereas when you can consider all of its component notions at the same time, you have an intuitive idea of it. Mathematical notions for Leibniz are going to be symbolic, because when we consider mathematical notions, he explains that we consider them using the symbol of the word side or the word equality without actually grasping the nature of the things signified by side and equality. So on this picture, on this kind of typology of notions or ideas, human progress in our knowledge consists in moving from the left side of the screen to the right side of the screen, moving from the least perfect knowledge to more perfect knowledge, and clearing up our obscure ideas, making distinct or confused ideas, making adequate or inadequate ideas, and ideally making intuitive or symbolic ideas. Now, the last bit is a bit misleading, as symbolic ideas and intuitive ideas can appear basically any point here, but this is a kind of simplified flow chart to give you an idea of what progress in knowledge looks like for Leibniz. So now that we've talked a lot about these different capacities that we might have of having clear ideas, distinct ideas, adequate ideas, or notions, let's talk about what an idea is. Now, the word idea has been used by all the philosophers we've read so far. But like clarity and distinctness, I think Leibniz is the first person we've read who actually takes the time to define it. So in order to contrast Leibniz's idea of ideas, or his definition of ideas, with another view, I'm going to jump ahead to next week and use Locke's definition from the essay concerning human understanding. For Locke, an idea is the thing present before the mind when thinking. It's the direct object of thought. Whenever the mind thinks, it thinks by considering ideas or being employed towards ideas. So it seems that for basically any mental phenomenon that happens while thinking, it's thinking about ideas for Locke. Now, this seems like an acceptable definition, we might say, but for Leibniz, this is far too inclusive. It's too permissive. Too many things are going to be called ideas here that then Leibniz would be comfortable with. So Leibniz thinks that we can only perceive ideas when we make use of intuitive thinking, when we actually grasp the notions themselves and don't make use of blind or symbolic thinking, hiding the notions behind signs or symbols that take their place. And further, he thinks that we can often mistakenly think that we have an idea when we engage in this kind of blind thinking. So here he says that blind thinking can sometimes hide a contradiction included in a complex notion of something. Now, if there's a contradiction within a notion, then the notion is going to be false. And he says here that an idea is true when its notion is possible and false when it includes a contradiction. If we're assuming that Leibniz here is contrasting possible with impossible, then false ideas are going to be impossible as well. And this seems right, as we shouldn't want contradictions to be possible in any real sense. And Leibniz thinks that we don't have an idea of impossible things. So if a thought hides a contradiction behind blind or symbolic thinking, it's not an idea. Ideas are true for Leibniz when their component notions are consistent, that they have a real definition, as opposed to a merely nominal one. A real definition occurs when you show that all the notions involved in a notion are consistent with each other. And so we have here that Leibniz also takes issue with people jumping from having what they mistake to be an idea of something to it being possible. I kind of like this quote that he says, "One cannot always appeal safely to an idea, and that many use a splendid honorific improperly to prop up certain creatures of their imagination, for we don't always have an idea corresponding to everything we consciously think of." So a few of you had actually expressed some skepticism towards Descartes when Descartes moved from clear and distinct idea to it being possible, or clearly and distinctly conceiving to it being possible. But Leibniz has kind of fleshed these notions out so that if a notion contains within it no contradiction, it's going to be true and therefore possible. Where true here is being used in this technical sense of not having a contradiction within it. So I'm curious if, by defining these terms in this way, if Leibniz avoids some of the worries that some of you expressed about moving from conceiving of something to it being possible. And I look forward to discussing that with you in class on Wednesday.